Welcome to Unusual Practice. This is Charlie, and I want to start off by asking you a question. I'd like you to think for a split of a second about this. When was the last time someone told you about their childhood and you couldn't quite tell if they were healing or actually pitching it? And the reason I'm asking this is because there's a survey that found that 72% of Gen Z women say their mental health challenges are, and I'm quoting, an important part of my identity. For comparison, that number sits at 34% for baby boomer women. So it's the same question, but a wildly different answer.
Roger, Charlie, we're ready to rock.
Practice life through endless songs. We're breaking the night. Chasing the light.
Which means either we broke something in the last 30 years or we discovered something, and I think it might be both. Today, we're going into a place that's going to make some of you, as usual, uncomfortable. Not because the topic is dangerous, but because some of you are going to recognize yourselves. And that is the whole point of this podcast. Because that's exactly where all the good stuff lives. Today's episode, you don't have trauma. You, honey, have a brand. Trauma. Say it 5 years ago and people lowered their voice. They looked around, maybe changed the subject. Say it now and it's in Instagram bios. It's in Hinge prompts. It's being workshopped into content pillars. The hashtag trauma has over 4 million posts on TikTok, and the broader category trauma responses has 46.5 million. That's not a community. That's a census.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Now, before you put me in your phone to fact check me, I want to be very clear about something. Real trauma, let's not debate this, guys. Real trauma exists. Actual PTSD is a clinical reality that has destroyed lives, careers, and genuinely dismantled people from the inside out. I am not here to dismiss that. I am not a dismisser. That's not the brand. But here is what is happening and what researchers are now documenting with seriousness. We have turned suffering into syntax. We have taken the language that psychiatrists and trauma therapists spend decades developing, words with precise clinical weight, and we've democratized them into conversation starters. Terms like gaslighting, narcissist, attachment style, trigger, hypervigilance, which used to live exclusively in therapy offices and diagnostic manuals, now, well, they live in HR emails, group chats, and, well, of course, breakup texts. Researchers at the Journal of Psychiatry Reform put it like this. When these concepts get condensed into digestible social media posts, their clinical nuance doesn't just get lost, it gets replaced. What fills the gap is something far more personal, something that benefits the person using the language more than it describes their actual experience. It starts to function less like diagnosis and more like identity construction. In other words, less here's what happened to me and more here's who I am. And that, my friends, is where it starts to get interesting. Now, what happens when the identity you built around your pain starts to need protecting? I'll tell you what I mean. I want to introduce you to a German word because, of course, the Germans have a word for this, and of course, I'm butchering it. Krankheitsgewinn. Yeah. Basically, it translates literally as illness gain. The secondary benefit you receive from being sick, not the illness itself, but what the illness gets you, which usually is sympathy, reduced expectations, permission to rest, a reason why, and a whole community that comes with it. Sigmund Freud identified this not as a moral failing in patients, but as a completely human psychological tendency. When suffering starts to pay dividends, the unconscious mind takes notes. It's not cynical. It's apparently survival. Now, fast forward 120 years and put that same tendency on an algorithm. TikTok does not reward nuance, it rewards emotional resonance. And the single most efficient form of emotional resonance, the thing that stops the scroll, generates comments, creates parasocial bonds, drives follows, is relatable pain delivered with personality. You cry with good lighting, you get 800,000 views. You explain your attachment style in a 90-second reel, you become someone's favorite account. What Freud identified as an unconscious tendency, we have now built a total economy around it. Here's what makes this genuinely complicated, not just an edgy thing to say. The people doing this often genuinely believe what they're saying. Basically, the pain is real. The experience happened, but the framing, the performance of it, the language used, the specific therapeutic vocabulary selected, that part has been shaped by what gets engagement. Clinical psychologist Joanne Finkelstein, author of Sexism and Sensibility, said something on NPR that I continuously keep thinking about. She raised the question of whether we are now medicalizing imperfection, whether by wrapping every difficult experience in diagnostic language, we are accidentally convincing young people that they are fundamentally broken rather than just temporarily in pain. And those are not the same thing, not even close. I want to take you somewhere else for a second, because the Western internet tends to assume it invented emotional complexity, and it did not. You see, Japan in 1971, a psychoanalyst named Takai Doi publishes a book called The Anatomy of Dependence. In it, he describes a concept called amai, which comes from the verb amairu, meaning to presume on another's benevolence, basically to lean, to depend sweetly, to seek indulgence from someone you trust. There's no equivalent English word for that. And that absence is actually the point. In Japanese culture, depending on others is not weakness, it's actually connection. Suffering isn't performed for an audience, it's absorbed into the collective. You don't broadcast your pain, you share your burden, and the community holds it with you. Compare that to what happened in Japan after the 1995 Great Hanshin earthquake and the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack. Researchers found something different and fascinating. Despite experiencing enormous collective trauma, natural disasters, wartime memory, catastrophic loss, Japan had produced almost no PTSD research for 50 years after World War II. It's a different architecture of pain, not necessarily denial. Their motto said, "We endure together." Patience is a virtue, and the individual self is not the primary site of suffering. Western therapeutic culture says exactly the opposite. You are the primary. Your story, your diagnosis, your healing, first person singular, curated, posted. And I'm not saying one is better. I'm saying when you have only one framework for understanding pain, you start fitting every experience into it, even the ones that don't belong there.
Feeling disconnected from yourself and society's fast pace? Unusual Practice podcast dives into neuroscience, quantum mysteries, untold cultural truths, and hidden societal patterns. Charli guides you to think deeper, connect stronger, and heal fractured paths in life. It is time to uncover the extraordinary within and release the programming. Tune in on your favorite platform now. Expand your mind with Unusual Practice today.
Research published in the European Journal of Psychotherapy and Counseling calls this the therapeutic turn. Researchers Bandinelli and Pinzon Arteaga describe it as the way psychotherapeutic language has moved out of the clinic and started to individualize suffering, which is a polite academic way of saying we've made every collective problem a personal one. Every systemic failure, a trauma response, and every bad day, a dysregulation. And I'll just say this plainly. That is enormously convenient for the people who sell the solutions. So now I want you to stay with me, because what Nietzsche said about suffering is either going to make you rethink all of this or make you unreasonably angry at a dead philosopher, and possibly both. There's a quote you've definitely seen. It's on wall art, in bios, tattooed on forearms. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering. It is not by Nietzsche. I need you to know that. It's from a preface by Gordon Allport in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. The misattribution has become its own kind of meme, which is darkly funny given what we're talking about today. What Nietzsche actually wrote, and this is from Beyond Good and Evil, was this: the discipline of suffering, of great suffering, has been the sole cause of every enhancement in humanity so far. Same territory, but notice the word discipline, not display, not documentation, not content. For Nietzsche, suffering was the forge. You go in, something gets made, you come out different. The point was never the fire. The point was what you became on the other side of it. And here's what's radical about the idea in 2026. Nietzsche was telling us to move through pain, not live inside it. The architecture of modern trauma culture does exactly the opposite. It builds residence inside the wound. It makes the wound the address. Look, I'm not coming at this cold, because the pull is real. When you name what hurt you, something releases. When you find people who say me too, when you finally have a word for why you've always been this way, that is not nothing. That is really, honestly, truly powerful. The question isn't whether naming pain matters. The question is what happens when the name becomes the ceiling.
I know you're pissed, all right? But just listen to me for 5 seconds.
Okay, here's the psychological mechanics of what's actually happening. And this is the part I want you to kind of just sit with for a second. When your trauma becomes your identity, it does something very specific to your sense of self. It becomes load-bearing, meaning if the trauma goes away or heals or gets reframed, a part of you goes with it. The identity collapses. You have to rebuild who you are from scratch. And that is, hand on heart, terrifying. And the mind, your beautiful, irrational, self-protective mind, will do almost anything to avoid that. So it kind of keeps the wound fresh. It finds evidence that confirms it. It interprets ambiguous situations through the lens of the established hurt. It seeks out communities where the wound is validated and celebrated. Not because you're broken, but because you're human. And the human brain will defend its own narrative with the same energy it defends its survival. Psychologists call this schema maintenance. The story the brain tells about itself. It works very hard to keep consistent. And here's what no one in the TikTok therapy space will tell you. Healing is not trending because healing ends the content. If you heal, truly, though I don't fully believe anybody heals completely. I think you just get to a point in your life where you're like, okay, I'm just not dealing with that. But if you heal, genuinely, practically move through the thing, you lose the story. You lose the community built around the story, and you lose the identity that the story produced. You might even lose the following. That's just the unfortunate alignment of psychological mechanisms with economic incentives in a digital attention economy. Okay, look, the real question is about your trauma. And we're getting into that now. Let me ask you something. Not the you that's listening to a podcast, the you that's alone at 2 a.m. with your phone. So hear this. When you describe what happened to you, does it feel like reporting something? Or does it feel like performing something? Be honest. Do you notice yourself choosing the words that land best? Editing for effect, feeling even slightly the anticipation of being understood, rewarded by the listener's reaction? I'm not asking to make you feel bad. I really am not. I mean, what benefits do I get out of this? I'm asking because that moment of noticing, that's where the real information is. Because there's a difference between processing pain and producing pain. Processing is internal, often uncomfortable, not photogenic, and has an end. Producing is external, socially rewarded, repeatable, and builds an audience. Both of them can start from the same real hurt. Writer Freya India published a piece titled "Nobody Has a Personality Anymore." And in it, she describes watching young women lose the thread of who they are underneath a diagnosis. She writes that they no longer have memories, they have trigger warnings, they no longer have preferences, they have trauma responses. Their whole inner life has been translated into clinical language that sounds like self-knowledge, but might actually be self-replacement. And that line kind of wrecked me because there's a version of self-awareness that is actually the opposite of self-knowledge. It looks like insight. It uses the vocabulary of growth, but it's just a much more sophisticated cage. I'm going to give you a 5-step plan. You have enough of those. The internet is drowning in 5-step plans with stock photo sunrises and the word healing in a handwriting font. What I will give you is actually a question, one question. And if you sit with this question honestly, it's going to do more work than any framework. Is this story serving the life you want, or is it serving the identity you've built around not having it? That's it. I'm going to repeat it again. Is this story serving the life you want, or is it serving the identity you've built around not having it? Because some of what you've labeled trauma is real. Some of it needs professional care, time, and proper support, not a podcast. And there are parts of what happened to you that genuinely shaped who you are. And that shaping deserves to be acknowledged, grieved, and integrated. But if the primary function of your pain story right now is to explain why you can't commit, you can't try, you can't be accountable, you can't show up, then it's no longer a wound, it's an alibi. Nietzsche said the man who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Viktor Frankl proved it under conditions that make our modern suffering look, frankly, embarrassing. He didn't say, name your wound and stay in it. He said, find the meaning, move toward it, and let it pull you through. The difference between a scar and an open wound is not time. It is what you actually do with the tissue.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
So here's where I'm leaving you today, and I'm not wrapping this in a bow because you don't need a bow. You need an honest mirror. You're allowed to have been hurt. You're allowed to name it, and you are allowed to have needed a language for what happened when you had none.
I like you. Do you like me?
Chasing the light, world spins wide, but we take control.
But you are also allowed, required even, to one day pick up that story and ask, is this still true? Or is this just what I got used to saying? Because the bravest thing you might do this week isn't post about your healing. It's quietly, privately ask yourself, what would I be if I was not this?
You don't know the power of the dark side.
World spins wide, but we take control.
And see what answers come up. Because whoever that person is, they're still in there. They're waiting. They've been waiting for you.
Practice life through endless songs.
Okay, guys, before you go, if this episode made you feel seen, called out, slightly attacked, but in a good way, or you actually paused it 3 times to text someone a timestamp, that means it worked. And it also means I need you to do one of the following. Share it, leave a review, and follow Unusual Practice on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you consume your intellectual chaos, because next episode, we're going somewhere even more uncomfortable, as I always do. And you won't want to miss it.
Up we rise, heart of rock and roll.
Until next time, stay curious, stay honest, and for the love of everything, go be someone your therapist has not diagnosed yet. Ta-ta!
Mom, somebody just followed me.
Fate where love belongs. Practice life through endless songs. Through the chaos, feel the